Two 9-year-old boys with matching worn sneakers and determined expressions set up a rickety card table on the pristine sidewalk outside the most expensive house in Riverside Heights. Their handwritten sign read, "Fresh lemonade, 50 cents," in crayon letters that wobbled across a piece of cardboard torn from a cereal box. What the millionaire inside didn't know was that these boys had walked 3 miles through the scorching summer heat, past dozens of busy intersections and crowded neighborhoods, just to place their stand at his front gate. Their reason would change everything he thought he knew about the world outside his iron-wrought fence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Maple Street as Marcus Henderson pulled back the silk curtains of his corner office, revealing a view that had cost him $12 million. The manicured lawns stretched endlessly toward the horizon, punctuated by marble fountains and perfectly trimmed hedges that formed geometric patterns visible from his third-floor window. His estate sprawled across 15 acres in Riverside Heights, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, where privacy was purchased by the acre and neighbors communicated through their landscapers rather than over backyard fences. Marcus adjusted his Italian silk tie and checked his Rolex, mentally calculating the profits from his latest real estate acquisition. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small inheritance into a billion-dollar portfolio. That included shopping centers, office complexes, and luxury developments across 3 states. Success had become his religion, and money was both his altar and his god. The bronze plaques lining his office walls testified to his achievements. Businessman of the Year, Philanthropist of the Decade, Visionary Developer. Each award represented another rung on the ladder he had climbed with relentless determination. His morning routine was as precise as a Swiss watch. Coffee from beans imported from a single plantation in Colombia, prepared by his personal chef, who had trained in France. Business news delivered on a tablet with leather binding that cost more than most people made in a month. Stock reports analyzed while his trainer set up equipment in the private gym that occupied the entire west wing of his mansion. Everything in Marcus Henderson's world was controlled, predictable, and expensive. The intercom on his mahogany desk buzzed with the voice of Mrs. Catherine Walsh, his head of household staff. Her British accent carried the authority of someone who had managed the homes of the wealthy for 30 years, and Marcus respected her efficiency above all else. "Mr. Henderson, there appears to be some sort of situation at the front gate," she announced with the measured tone she reserved for minor inconveniences. Marcus glanced up from his tablet, his attention only half-focused. Situations at the front gate usually involved lost tourists, delivery drivers seeking directions, or occasionally, reporters hoping for a glimpse into his private world. His security system was designed to handle such intrusions without disturbing his carefully orchestrated schedule. "What kind of situation, Catherine?" he asked, returning his attention to the quarterly reports that demanded his immediate review. "Two young boys have established what appears to be a beverage stand directly outside the main entrance," she replied, with the diplomatic precision that had made her invaluable to his household operations. Marcus set down his tablet and walked to the window that overlooked the front approach to his estate. From his elevated position, he could see the ornate iron gates that marked the boundary between his private world and the chaos of public existence. Beyond the gates, the streets stretched in both directions, lined with other massive estates owned by technology executives, entertainment moguls, and financial titans who valued their solitude as much as their success. At first, he saw nothing unusual The morning traffic moved at its typical leisurely pace, consisting mainly of luxury vehicles transporting housekeepers, gardeners, and personal assistants to their various appointments. The sidewalks remained pristine and empty, as they had been designed to be in a neighborhood where pedestrian traffic was neither expected nor encouraged. Then he spotted them. Two small figures hunched over a folding table that looked like it had been rescued from someone's garage sale. Even from 3 stories up, Marcus could see that the table wobbled precariously on uneven legs, and the boys had wedged what appeared to be a rolled-up newspaper under one corner to stabilize it. Their positioning was unmistakable, directly in front of his gates, where anyone entering or leaving his property would have to acknowledge their presence. Marcus frowned, his businessman's mind immediately calculating the implications. Property values in Riverside Heights depended on maintaining an atmosphere of exclusivity and refinement. A lemonade stand, no matter how innocent, represented the kind of commercial activity that homeowners associations spent fortunes preventing. The sight of 2 children selling beverages on the street could trigger complaints from neighbors whose own property values might be affected by any perceived decline in the neighborhood's prestige. "How long have they been there?" he asked. Catherine, his voice carrying the edge of annoyance that his staff had learned to recognize as a warning. "Approximately 15 minutes, sir. They arrived on foot, carrying their supplies in what appeared to be a small wagon." Marcus checked his watch again. His personal trainer would arrive in 20 minutes, followed by a conference call with investors in Singapore, and then a lunch meeting with the mayor regarding his latest development proposal. His schedule had no room for distractions, especially ones that involved children and homemade refreshments. "Have security handle it," he instructed, already turning back toward his desk. Politely, of course. Perhaps they can suggest a more appropriate location for their enterprise. "Certainly, sir. However, I should mention that they appear to be quite young, and the weather forecast predicts temperatures reaching 95 degrees today." Marcus paused, his hand halfway to his tablet. Catherine's comment carried an undertone that suggested she found the situation more complex than a simple trespassing issue. In his experience, when Catherine felt compelled to provide additional context, it meant she had observed something that merited his personal attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What exactly are you suggesting, Catherine? Perhaps it would be more appropriate if you spoke with them directly, sir. They seem quite determined, and given their age, a personal conversation might be more effective than involving security personnel." Marcus suppressed his irritation. His time was worth approximately $3,000 per hour when calculated against his annual earnings, and he had not achieved his current level of success by engaging in lengthy conversations with children about their entrepreneurial ventures. However, Catherine's judgment had proven invaluable over the years, and her suggestions usually contained wisdom that extended beyond their immediate circumstances. "Very well," he conceded. "I'll handle it myself. Have James bring the car around to the front gate. Actually, sir, they're close enough that you could easily walk to them. The exercise might be beneficial before your training session." The suggestion that he walk anywhere struck Marcus as mildly absurd. He owned 7 vehicles, including a Tesla Model S Plaid, a Bentley Continental GT, and a Range Rover that had been customized for security purposes. Walking was something he did on treadmills, in climate-controlled environments, with heart rate monitors and personal trainers ensuring optimal efficiency. But something in Catherine's tone suggested that this particular situation might require a more personal approach than arriving in a luxury vehicle that cost more than most people's houses. Perhaps the contrast would be too stark, the message too clear. Perhaps walking would demonstrate the kind of humility that occasionally proved useful in sensitive situations. "Fine," he agreed, though the word carried no enthusiasm. "I'll walk down and address the matter personally." Marcus changed from his business attire into more casual clothing, though his definition of casual still included shoes that cost $800 and a polo shirt that had been tailored specifically for his measurements. He had learned, early in his career, that appearance communicated authority more effectively than words, and even in informal situations, projecting success remained essential. The walk from his front door to the gate took nearly 3 minutes, winding down a curved driveway lined with imported Italian cypress trees and past flower beds that his landscaping team maintained with the precision of a golf course. The morning air was already thick with humidity, and Marcus could feel perspiration beginning to form despite the early hour. By the time he reached the gate, he had developed a renewed appreciation for the climate control systems throughout his estate. Through the ornate iron bars, he could see the boys more clearly now. They appeared to be twins, though their identical features were partially obscured by baseball caps that had seen better days. Their clothing was clean but obviously worn, the kind of hand-me-downs that spoke of families who prioritized necessity over fashion. The lemonade stand itself was a masterpiece of childhood ingenuity, a card table covered with a checkered tablecloth that had been secured with clothespins, plastic pitchers filled with pale yellow liquid, and a stack of small paper cups that probably came from a bathroom dispenser. What struck Marcus most forcefully was their focus. These were not children playing at running a business. They approached their enterprise with the seriousness of seasoned entrepreneurs. One boy carefully arranged the cups in precise rows, while the other used a permanent marker to improve their handwritten sign. Their movements were efficient and purposeful, suggesting a level of planning that exceeded typical childhood attention spans. Marcus activated the gate's electronic lock and stepped onto the public sidewalk. The boys looked up immediately, their identical brown eyes assessing him with the wariness of children who had learned to be cautious around adults they didn't recognize. "Good morning," Marcus said, modulating his voice to sound friendly rather than authoritative. "I'm Marcus Henderson. I live here." He gestured toward the estate behind him, though the gesture seemed unnecessary given the obvious connection between the mansion and its owner. The boy closest to him stepped forward slightly, assuming what appeared to be a protective position in front of his brother. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson. I'm Jake Martinez, and this is my brother Diego. We're selling lemonade today." Marcus noted the boy's politeness and the way he had positioned himself as the spokesperson for their operation. Leadership qualities, even in children, was something he recognized and respected. "I can see that, Jake. It's quite an impressive setup you have here." "Thank you, sir," Jake replied with the formal courtesy that suggested he had been coached in proper behavior around adults. "Would you like to try a cup? It's freshly made this morning, and we use real lemons, not the powder stuff." The offer caught Marcus off guard. He had approached the situation expecting to deliver a polite but firm explanation about why their location was inappropriate, followed by suggestions for alternative venues that would better serve their business goals. Instead, he found himself genuinely curious about these two young entrepreneurs who had chosen his gate as their preferred marketplace. "That sounds refreshing," he heard himself saying, though he couldn't remember making the decision to engage with their sales pitch. "How much for a cup?" 50 cents, Diego spoke for the first time, his voice slightly quieter than his brother's, but carrying the same note of determination. "But if you're our first customer, we'd be honored to offer you a discount." Marcus pulled his wallet from his pocket, noting how both boys' eyes widened slightly at the sight of the leather billfold that probably cost more than their monthly allowance. He selected a $20 bill, the smallest denomination he was carrying, and handed it to Jake. "Keep the change," he said, curious to see how they would respond to such an obviously disproportionate payment. Jake stared at the bill for several seconds, then looked up at Marcus with an expression that seemed far too serious for a 9-year-old face. "Mr. Henderson, this is way too much money for one cup of lemonade. We can't accept this." The response surprised Marcus more than he cared to admit. In his experience, most people accepted whatever money they were offered, especially when the amount exceeded their expectations. The boy's honesty suggested a level of integrity that seemed unusual in any age group, but particularly remarkable in children who were obviously from circumstances more modest than his own. "Consider it an investment in your business," Marcus replied, accepting the cup of lemonade that Diego had prepared with careful attention to filling it precisely to the rim. "Every successful enterprise needs startup capital." Jake folded the $20 bill and placed it carefully in a small metal box that served as their cash register. "Thank you, sir. That's very generous, but we want to earn our money by providing good service and a quality product." Marcus tasted the lemonade, expecting the overly sweet concoction that typically resulted from children's cooking experiments. Instead, he discovered a perfectly balanced blend of tart and sweet that suggested someone had taught these boys the fundamentals of proper recipe development. The drink was cold, refreshing, and remarkably professional in its preparation. "This is excellent," he said, and meant it. "Someone taught you well." "Our grandmother," Diego said, his face lighting up with obvious pride. "She used to run a restaurant before she retired. She says the secret is using fresh lemons and just the right amount of sugar, not too much." Marcus nodded approvingly, recognizing the wisdom that came from someone who understood the food service industry. "Your grandmother sounds like a smart businesswoman." "She is," Jake agreed. "She taught us that if you're going to do something, you should do it right, even if it's harder than taking shortcuts." The comment resonated with Marcus in ways he hadn't expected. His own success had been built on exactly that principle, refusing to accept mediocrity even when excellence required significantly more effort. These boys had somehow internalized a lesson that many adults never learned, and they were applying it to a lemonade stand with the same seriousness that he brought to billion-dollar real estate deals. "That's excellent advice," Marcus said. But I'm curious about something. This is a very exclusive neighborhood, and there aren't many people who walk by here. Wouldn't you have more customers if you set up your stand in a busier location? Perhaps near the shopping center or in one of the residential areas where families with children live." The question was both practical and probing. Marcus genuinely wanted to understand their business strategy, but he also hoped their answer might provide an opening to suggest alternative locations that would solve his property value concerns while supporting their entrepreneurial efforts. Jake and Diego exchanged a look that seemed to carry more communication than most adult conversations. It was the kind of silent understanding that developed between siblings who had learned to rely on each other in ways that suggested their bond extended beyond typical family relationships. "We chose this location for a specific reason," Jake said finally, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "But it's kind of personal." Marcus felt his businessman's instincts activate. In his experience, when people described their motivations as personal, it usually meant they were either embarrassed about their true reasons or trying to hide something that might complicate the situation. However, he had also learned that personal motivations often revealed the most important information about any business relationship. "I understand personal reasons," he said gently, "but as the property owner, I'm naturally curious about why you chose this particular spot. If there's something about this location that makes it special for your business, perhaps I can help you understand the best way to take advantage of that." Diego looked at his brother, seeking permission to continue. Jake nodded slightly, though. His expression suggested he was still deciding how much information to share. Our grandmother lives in the assisted living center about 2 miles from here, Diego began, his voice becoming quieter as he spoke. Sunset Manor. She's been there for 8 months now because she got sick and couldn't take care of herself anymore. Marcus nodded, familiar with Sunset Manor. It was one of the more affordable senior care facilities in the area, the kind of place that provided adequate care without the luxury amenities that characterized the expensive retirement communities where many of his wealthy neighbors would eventually reside. She used to tell us stories about this neighborhood, Jake continued, picking up where his brother had left off, about how successful people lived here, people who had worked hard and achieved their dreams. She said that someday, when we grew up and worked hard enough, maybe we could live in a place like this too. Marcus felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. The boy's words carried the kind of innocent ambition that he remembered from his own childhood, when success seemed like a destination rather than a journey that never actually ended. That's a beautiful dream, he said, though he wasn't sure how it connected to their choice of location for the lemonade stand. The thing is, Diego said, glancing at his brother for support, our grandmother's medical bills are really expensive. Our parents work 2 jobs each, but it's still not enough to cover all the costs. The assisted living center sent a letter last week saying that if they can't pay the balance by the end of the month, they'll have to move our grandmother to a different place. Marcus felt the familiar weight of understanding settle over him. He had seen this scenario countless times in his business dealings. Families struggling with medical expenses that exceeded their insurance coverage, forced to make impossible choices between quality care for their loved ones and financial survival. We heard our parents talking about it late at night, Jake added, his voice barely above a whisper. They were crying. Our mom was saying maybe they should take out another loan against the house, but our dad was worried they wouldn't be able to make the payments. The picture was becoming clearer, and Marcus found himself respect for these boys growing with each revelation. They had overheard adult conversations about financial stress and had decided to take action rather than simply accepting their powerlessness in the situation. So you decided to start a lemonade stand to help with the bills, Marcus concluded, though he suspected there was more to their story. Not exactly, Diego said, exchanging another meaningful look with his brother. We know that 50 cents per cup isn't going to solve anything. Even if we sold 100 cups, it would only be $50, and the bill is for thousands. Marcus was intrigued. If they understood the mathematical impossibility of their situation, why had they chosen this particular approach? And more importantly, why had they chosen his gate as their location? Then what's your real plan? He asked, genuinely curious now about the thinking behind their strategy. Jake took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal something that required courage to admit. Our grandmother always told us that successful people didn't just get lucky. She said they worked hard, but they also learned how to recognize opportunities and ask for help when they needed it. The boy's words carried the echo of hard-earned wisdom, the kind of practical knowledge that usually came from experience rather than instruction. Marcus could hear the voice of an older woman who had lived through enough challenges to understand how the world actually worked, as opposed to how children's books suggested it should work. She said that sometimes when you really need help, you have to be brave enough to approach people who might be able to make a difference, Diego continued, even if it feels scary or embarrassing. Marcus began to understand the true nature of their strategy, and his respect for their grandmother's guidance increased exponentially. These boys weren't operating a simple lemonade stand. They were implementing a sophisticated networking approach that most adult professionals never mastered. So, you chose this neighborhood because you're hoping to meet people who might be able to help your family's situation. he said, stating what he was beginning to recognize as their actual business plan. Not exactly asking for charity, Jake clarified quickly, his voice carrying a note of pride that suggested he had been taught to value independence. We want to provide good service and earn whatever money we can. But our grandmother said that sometimes when you meet the right people and they see that you're willing to work hard, opportunities can develop that you never expected. Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by the sophistication of their approach. These 9-year-old boys had developed a strategy that incorporated direct sales, networking, community outreach, and personal branding in ways that many of his business associates would find challenging to execute. "And you chose my gate specifically because," he prompted, curious to understand how they had selected him as their primary target. Diego looked down at his shoes, and Marcus could see embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "We looked up information about this neighborhood online at the library. We found articles about the people who live here, their businesses, and their charitable foundations." "You researched me," Marcus said, though his tone carried admiration rather than accusation. "We're really sorry if that seems creepy," Jake said quickly. "We just wanted to understand who lived here and whether there might be people who had experience helping families with medical situations." Marcus was quiet for several moments, processing the implications of what he had just learned. These children had conducted market research, identified potential targets, developed a product offering, and created a strategy for approaching prospects that many professional fundraisers would envy. More importantly, they had done all of this while maintaining their dignity and refusing to simply ask for handouts. "How much does your family owe?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would be both more complicated and more expensive than a lemonade stand could address. "The balance is $3,800, Diego replied immediately, suggesting he had memorized the number through repeated exposure to adult conversations about their financial crisis. Plus another $1,200 per month ongoing for the care that insurance doesn't cover. Marcus did the mental calculation automatically. $5,800 was a significant amount for a family struggling with multiple jobs and medical expenses, but it represented less than he typically spent on a single business dinner. The ongoing monthly costs were more challenging, representing the kind of persistent financial pressure that could destroy a family's stability over time. "And if your parents can't manage the payments?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Our grandmother would have to move to a state facility," Jake said, his voice barely audible. "We visited one when they were trying to find a place she could afford. It was..." He paused, searching for words that could convey his reaction without seeming disrespectful. "It wasn't a place where someone like our grandmother should have to live," Diego finished, his protective instincts clearly extending to both his brother and his grandmother. Marcus nodded, familiar with the dramatic differences between private care facilities and state-funded institutions. The quality of care, the living conditions, and the dignity afforded to residents varied enormously based on their family's ability to pay for premium services. He found himself facing a decision that felt more complex than most of his business acquisitions. These boys had approached him with a combination of entrepreneurial spirit, family loyalty, and strategic thinking that commanded his respect. Their grandmother had clearly taught them lessons about hard work and integrity that aligned with his own values. Their willingness to take action rather than simply accepting their circumstances demonstrated the kind of initiative that he considered essential for success. At the same time, Marcus had built his wealth by making rational business decisions rather than emotional ones. He had learned early in his career that charity, while personally satisfying, rarely produced the kind of systemic change that actually improved people's lives in meaningful ways. Simply paying their families' bills would solve their immediate crisis, but wouldn't address the underlying financial vulnerabilities that had created the situation. "Can I ask you both a question?" he said, settling into a more comfortable position against his gatepost. The boys nodded eagerly, clearly hopeful that his continued engagement suggested positive developments. "If I were to help your family with these expenses, what would you want to learn about business and financial management that might help prevent similar situations in the future?" Dun. The question was partially a test, designed to gauge whether these boys possessed the kind of thinking that could benefit from mentorship rather than simple financial assistance. But it was also a genuine inquiry about their long-term goals and their willingness to invest effort in developing skills that could serve them throughout their lives. Jake and Diego looked at each other again, and Marcus could see them processing the implications of his question. They seemed to understand that he was offering something potentially more valuable than money, though they were probably too young to fully appreciate the distinction. "Our grandmother always said that knowledge was the only thing that nobody could ever take away from you," Jake said slowly. "She said that understanding how money works was just as important as knowing how to earn it. We'd want to learn how to help our parents make better financial decisions," Diego added, "and how to make sure that when we're adults, we can take care of our families without worrying about medical bills and emergencies." Marcus smiled, recognizing in their answers the same hunger for knowledge that had driven his own journey from modest circumstances to extraordinary wealth. These boys possessed something that couldn't be taught, the understanding that education and skill development were investments that compound over time in ways that simple financial assistance never could. "Here's what I'd like to propose," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I'm going to make some calls today to handle your grandmother's current situation. But more importantly, I'd like to offer you both summer internships in my business." The boys stared at him with expressions that shifted rapidly from confusion to excitement to uncertainty. Marcus could see them trying to process an offer that exceeded their expectations, while simultaneously wondering if they were qualified for whatever an internship might entail. "What would we do in an internship?" Diego asked, his voice carrying both excitement and nervousness. "You'd spend 3 mornings per week at my offices, learning about real estate development, financial planning and business strategy," Marcus explained. "You'd also work with my accountant to understand how families can build emergency funds and plan for unexpected expenses." "And in exchange?" Jake asked, demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking that suggested he understood business relationships involved mutual benefit. "In exchange, you'll help me with something I've been struggling with," Marcus replied, surprised to find himself being completely honest with 2 9-year-old boys about a professional challenge that he rarely discussed with his adult colleagues. "I've been thinking about developing a community outreach program for my business, something that would help families in situations similar to yours. But I've never figured out how to design something that actually works, rather than just making me feel good about writing checks." The admission felt strange coming from someone who was accustomed to having answers rather than questions. But Marcus realized that these boys had already taught him something important about the gap between his assumptions and the reality of other people's lives. "You'd really want our help with something like that?" Diego asked, his voice filled with the kind of wonder that suggested he had never imagined being asked to contribute to adult problem-solving. "I think you two understand things about family financial pressure and community resources that I need to learn," Marcus replied. "And I think I can teach you things about business and money management that might be useful for your futures." Jake extended his hand in the kind of formal handshake gesture that suggested his grandmother had taught him about business etiquette. "Mr. Henderson, you have a deal." Marcus shook hands with both boys, struck by the firmness of their grips and the seriousness in their eyes. As he walked back toward his estate, he found himself genuinely excited about a business partnership for the first time in years. Behind him, he could hear the boys discussing their new situation with the kind of animated enthusiasm that only children could generate about unexpected opportunities. Their lemonade stand had accomplished exactly what they had hoped. It had created a connection with someone who could make a difference in their family's life. But Marcus suspected that he might have learned more from the encounter than they had. These two young entrepreneurs had reminded him why he had started building businesses in the first place, and they had shown him a version of success that he had somehow forgotten during his climb to the top of the financial mountain. As he reached his front door, Marcus was already planning the phone calls that would resolve their grandmother's immediate crisis. But more importantly, he was thinking about the lessons he wanted to share with two boys who had reminded him that the best business relationships were built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that everyone has something valuable to offer. The lemonade stand would probably disappear by the end of the day, but the partnership it had created was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the marble-floored lobby of Henderson Development Corporation, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as Jake and Diego Martinez climbed out of their mother's 15-year-old Honda Civic. The contrast between the gleaming corporate headquarters and the family's modest vehicle served as a daily reminder of the economic chasm that separated their worlds. Yet somehow these two young boys had managed to bridge that gap. With nothing more than determination and homemade lemonade, Sofia Martinez waved goodbye to her sons before driving off to her morning shift at the medical supply warehouse, where she worked as an inventory coordinator. Marcus had learned during their initial family meeting that she typically worked from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then rushed home to change clothes before starting her evening job as a customer service representative for an insurance company. Her husband, Roberto, maintained a similar schedule with his construction work and weekend landscaping business, creating a household where someone was always working, but money remained perpetually tight. The boys entered the building with the kind of nervous excitement that characterized their approach to every new experience. Over the past 3 weeks, they had adapted to the corporate environment with remarkable speed, learning to navigate the security protocols, elevator systems, and professional etiquette that governed interactions in the business world. Marcus watched them greet the reception staff with the polite courtesy that their grandmother had obviously instilled in them, and he felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. Dr. Patricia Reeves, Marcus's chief financial officer, appeared beside him carrying 2 thick folders and wearing the expression of someone who had important information to share. She had been skeptical when Marcus first announced his intention to bring 2 9-year-old children into the corporate environment as unpaid interns. But her attitude had shifted dramatically once she witnessed their enthusiasm for learning and their surprisingly sophisticated questions about business operations. "The Martinez family financial analysis is complete," she said, handing him one of the folders. "I've also prepared the preliminary business plan for the community outreach program, incorporating the suggestions that Jake and Diego provided during yesterday's brainstorming session." Marcus accepted the folders, but continued watching the boys as they made their way toward the executive elevator. Their transformation over the past 3 weeks had been remarkable to observe. The nervous uncertainty that had characterized their first day had given way to confident familiarity with routines that would have intimidated many adults. They had learned to ask intelligent questions, take detailed notes, and contribute meaningfully to discussions about complex financial concepts. "What did you discover about their family situation?" Marcus asked, opening the folder to scan the executive summary that Patricia had prepared. "It's more complicated than simple medical debt," she replied, her voice carrying the analytical tone that characterized her approach to financial problems. "The family has been systematically depleting their savings and borrowing against their assets for the past 18 months, ever since the grandmother's initial diagnosis required her to stop working." Marcus frowned, recognizing the pattern that often preceded family financial collapse. Medical emergencies frequently created cascading economic crises that extended far beyond the immediate costs of treatment, forcing families to make decisions that compromised their long-term stability in order to address short-term survival needs. "Roberto Martinez has been borrowing against his construction equipment to cover monthly expenses," Patricia continued, flipping to a detailed breakdown of the family's debt obligations. "They've also taken a second mortgage on their house and accumulated approximately $12,000 in credit card debt with interest rates that average 18% annually." The picture was even more dire than Marcus had initially understood. The assisted living expenses for Sophia's mother represented only the most visible portion of a financial crisis that threatened to destroy everything the family had worked to build over the course of their marriage. At their current trajectory, they'll be facing bankruptcy within 8 months, Patricia concluded, closing the folder with the finality of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "Even if we resolve the immediate assisted living crisis, the underlying debt structure will continue generating obligations that exceed their earning capacity." Marcus absorbed this information while watching Jake and Diego emerge from the elevator on the 15th floor, where they would spend the morning working with the development team on a project that involved analyzing demographic data for potential residential communities. Their excitement about participating in real business activities remained undiminished by the economic pressures that their parents faced at home. Though Marcus suspected they understood more about their family's situation than any 9-year-old should be forced to comprehend. "What's your recommendation?" he asked Patricia, though he had already begun formulating his own approach to the problem. "Complete debt restructuring," she replied without hesitation. "Pay off the high-interest obligations, renegotiate the mortgage terms, and establish a comprehensive financial education program that addresses both current crisis management and long-term wealth-building strategies." Marcus nodded, appreciating the thoroughness of her analysis. Patricia approached financial problems with the same systematic methodology that had made her invaluable in managing his corporate investments, and her recommendations typically reflected both immediate practicality and long-term strategic thinking. "Estimated cost for full debt resolution?" he asked, though he knew the number would represent a fraction of what he typically spent on business entertainment in any given quarter. $47,000 for complete debt elimination, plus establishment of a $20,000 emergency fund, Patricia replied, consulting her notes. Total financial package of $67,000, which would essentially reset their family finances to a stable foundation. No Cientin, Marcus considered the proposal while watching through the windows, as Diego explained something to his brother, using animated hand gestures that suggested passionate engagement with whatever concept they were discussing. The amount Patricia had quoted represented less than he had spent on his last vacation, yet it would fundamentally transform the Martinez family's quality of life and future opportunities. "Approved," he said, closing the folder and turning toward his office. "But I want the financial education component to be ongoing rather than a single intervention. These boys have demonstrated exceptional aptitude for business concepts, and I suspect their parents would benefit from the same kind of systematic learning approach." Patricia made notes on her tablet, though Marcus could see questions forming in her expression. During their years of working together, she had witnessed his charitable contributions to various organizations, but those donations typically involved writing checks to established non-profits rather than direct intervention in individual family situations. "If I may ask," she said diplomatically, "what's driving this level of personal involvement? The Martinez family certainly deserves assistance, but this represents a significant departure from your usual philanthropic approach." Marcus paused in the doorway of his office, considering how to articulate something that he hadn't fully processed himself. His interaction with Jake and Diego had triggered a shift in his thinking about success, community responsibility, and the ways that wealth could be used to create meaningful change rather than simply accumulating for its own sake. "These boys reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said finally. "Success isn't just about reaching the top of the mountain. It's about using your position to help other people find their own paths upward." Patricia nodded thoughtfully, though Marcus suspected she was still processing the implications of his philosophical evolution. During the 15 years she had worked for Henderson Development Corporation, she had never heard him express such explicitly humanitarian motivations for business decisions. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning sessions, but Marcus found his attention repeatedly drawn to the conference room where Jake and Diego were working with his development team. Through the glass walls, he could observe their intense concentration as they studied maps, demographic reports, and market analysis data that most adults would find overwhelmingly complex. Maria Santos, his director of community relations, had initially been assigned to supervise the boys' activities as a favor to Marcus, but she had quickly discovered that their perspectives offered genuine value to the planning process. Their questions about playground accessibility, school proximity, and public transportation options had identified considerations that the adult professionals had overlooked, leading to design modifications that would improve the livability of the proposed residential development. During the lunch break, Marcus joined the boys in the corporate cafeteria, where they had attracted a small crowd of employees who enjoyed hearing their observations about the business world from a child's perspective. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and several department heads had begun incorporating their morning visits into their own project planning schedules. "Mr. Henderson," Jake said, looking up from the sandwich that his mother had packed for him, "we've been thinking about something, and we wanted to ask your advice." Marcus settled into the chair across from them, noting how their posture had become more confident and professional over the past 3 weeks. The nervous deference that had characterized their early interactions had evolved into respectful familiarity, suggesting they had begun to see themselves as valued contributors rather than charity cases. "What's on your minds?" he asked, genuinely curious about whatever business problem had captured their attention. Diego pulled a small notebook from his backpack and flipped to a page covered with neat handwriting and simple diagrams. "We've been learning about market research and target demographics, and we started wondering about something related to our grandmother's situation." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued by the serious tone that Diego had adopted. Over the past 3 weeks, he had learned to pay careful attention when the boys shifted into their analytical mode, because their observations often revealed insights that his adult employees had missed. "There are lots of families at Sunset Manor who are dealing with the same financial problems that our family was facing," Jake continued, taking over the explanation with the seamless coordination that characterized their collaborative thinking. "We started wondering if there might be a business opportunity that could help solve multiple problems at the same time." Marcus felt his entrepreneurial instincts activate. During his career, he had learned that the most successful business ventures typically emerged from identifying market needs that existing companies were failing to address effectively. If Jake and Diego had discovered a genuine opportunity within the senior care industry, their insights could potentially benefit far more families than just their own. "Tell me more about what you've observed," he said, pulling out his own notebook to capture their ideas. Diego consulted his notes before beginning. A lot of the residents at Sunset Manor have family members who want to help with expenses, but they're scattered all over the country. Grandchildren, nephews, cousins who would contribute money if they had an easy way to do it regularly. But there's no good system for coordinating those contributions, Jake added, building on his brother's observation. So family members end up sending checks randomly, or they forget, or they don't know how much other people are contributing. Marcus nodded, recognizing the logistical challenges that characterized many family financial situations. Coordinating. Contributions from multiple sources required the kind of systematic organization that most families lacked, particularly during emotional crisis periods when clear thinking became difficult. We also noticed that lots of residents have skills and knowledge that aren't being used, Diego continued, flipping to another page in his notebook. There's a lady who used to be a seamstress who could teach people how to alter clothes. A man who was an electrician who could help people with simple home repairs. A woman who was a teacher who could tutor kids who are struggling in school. Marcus felt excitement building as he began to understand the direction of their thinking. These boys had identified a classic business opportunity, unutilized resources that could be connected with unmet market demand through an appropriate coordination mechanism. So you're envisioning some kind of platform that would facilitate both financial coordination and skill sharing, he said, testing his understanding of their concept. Exactly, Jake said, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Families could use it to organize contributions for their relatives' care costs, and residents could use it to offer services that would help them earn money while staying mentally and socially active. Marcus was impressed by the sophistication of their analysis. They had identified a market gap that addressed both financial sustainability and quality of life issues for senior care residents, while simultaneously creating value for the broader community through access to experienced professionals offering affordable services. Have you thought about the technology requirements for something like this? He asked, curious about how deeply they had considered the implementation challenges. Diego nodded enthusiastically. We talked to Mrs. Chen in your IT department, and she explained about database management and user interface design. She said it would be like combining a crowdfunding platform with a freelance marketplace, but specifically designed for senior care situations. Marcus made detailed notes while the boys continued explaining their concept. Their idea had genuine merit, addressing real market needs while creating sustainable revenue streams that could improve the financial stability of senior care facilities and their residents. More importantly, it demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that could potentially transform entire industries if properly developed and implemented. This is exactly the kind of community-focused business model that I've been hoping to develop, he told them, closing his notebook and leaning back in his chair. Would you be interested in helping me create a pilot program to test these concepts? The boys exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Jake responded. We'd be honored to help, Mr. Henderson, but we want to make sure that our grandmother and the other residents would actually benefit from whatever we create. And we want to learn enough about business development that we could eventually start similar projects on our own, Diego added, demonstrating the kind of long-term thinking that Marcus had learned to associate with successful entrepreneurs. Marcus smiled, recognizing in their conditions the same careful consideration that he applied to his most important business partnerships. These 9-year-old boys had learned to think strategically about collaboration, ensuring that their interests aligned with their partner's goals while maintaining their independence and future options. I think we can structure this as a joint venture, he said, extending his hand across the table. Henderson Development Corporation and Martinez Brothers Consulting, working together to revolutionize senior care support services. The boys shook his hand with the solemnity of seasoned business executives closing a major deal, though their excitement was evident in their barely suppressed grins. Marcus realized that he felt more genuine enthusiasm about this project than he had experienced regarding any business venture in recent memory. As they returned to the afternoon's activities, Marcus found himself thinking about the unexpected directions that his life had taken since two young entrepreneurs had appeared at his gate with a lemonade stand and a sophisticated understanding of networking strategy. Their presence in his corporate environment had triggered changes that extended far beyond their family's immediate financial crisis, inspiring him to reconsider his assumptions about success, community responsibility, and the kinds of legacy that truly mattered. The afternoon meetings proceeded with unusual energy, as word spread throughout the company about the pilot program that would be developed in partnership with Jake and Diego. Department heads began volunteering their expertise for various aspects of the project, and Marcus realized that his employees were as excited as he was about the opportunity to work on something that would create meaningful social impact while demonstrating innovative business practices. By the time Sofia Martinez arrived to collect her sons at the end of their workday, Marcus had assembled a preliminary project team and established a development timeline that would allow Jake and Diego to participate meaningfully in every phase of the business planning process. Their summer internship had evolved into something much more significant, a genuine business partnership that would provide them with comprehensive education in entrepreneurship while creating solutions for problems that affected thousands of families across the country. As he watched the Martinez family drive away in their aging Honda Civic, Marcus reflected on the irony that his most promising business venture in years had emerged from a 50-cent cup of lemonade sold by two children who had researched his charitable interests at the public library. Their approach to solving their family's crisis had demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that he had spent his entire career trying to cultivate in his professional relationships. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the detailed work of transforming a brilliant concept into a functional business model, but Marcus found himself looking forward to those challenges with the enthusiasm that had originally driven him to build his real estate empire. Jake and Diego Martinez had reminded him that the most rewarding business ventures were those that created value for everyone involved, and he was eager to discover what other lessons they would teach him as their partnership continued to evolve. 2 months after the lemonade stand encounter, Marcus stood in the main conference room of Sunset Manor, watching as Jake and Diego presented their community platform concept to an audience of residents, family members, and healthcare administrators. The transformation he witnessed went far beyond the professional presentation skills they had developed during their internship. These two young entrepreneurs had discovered something that had eluded Marcus throughout his successful business career: the profound satisfaction that came from creating solutions that genuinely improved people's lives. The platform they had designed, now called Care Connect, had evolved into something more sophisticated than Marcus had initially envisioned. Working with his technology team, the boys had helped create a comprehensive system that allowed family members to coordinate financial contributions while enabling residents to offer their professional skills to the broader community. But the real innovation lay in their understanding of the emotional dynamics that drove family decision-making during medical crises. Elena Rodriguez, Jake and Diego's grandmother, sat in the front row wearing the navy blue dress that Sofia had bought specifically for this presentation. Her recovery had been remarkable since the family's financial pressures had been eliminated, But Marcus could see that her pride in her grandson's accomplishments provided even more healing than the improved medical care. She listened intently as Diego explained how the platform would allow scattered family members to maintain meaningful connections with their elderly relatives while contributing to their care in manageable increments. "The beauty of this system," Diego said, gesturing toward the demonstration screen that displayed sample family profiles, "is that it transforms financial obligation into community participation. Instead of feeling guilty about not doing enough, family members become active partners in their relatives' ongoing well-being." Marcus watched the audience's reaction carefully, noting how residents leaned forward with interest while family members exchanged meaningful glances. During the pilot program's development phase, he had learned that successful business ventures required more than innovative technology. They needed to address the emotional and psychological needs that drove consumer behavior. Jake took over the presentation, explaining how the skills marketplace component would work. Mrs. Chen here was a professional accountant for 30 years before she retired. Through Care Connect, she can offer tax preparation services to young families in the community, earning money that helps cover her medication costs while staying mentally engaged with work she enjoys. Mrs. Chen, an 82-year-old woman who had been struggling with the isolation that often accompanied residential care, smiled broadly as Jake described her potential role in the community. Marcus could see how the platform addressed multiple problems simultaneously: financial sustainability, social isolation, and the waste of human resources that occurred when experienced professionals were forced into involuntary retirement. The Yao demonstration continued with examples of how the platform facilitated everything from tutoring services and home repair assistance to cooking classes and gardening consultations. Each resident's profile highlighted their professional background, available skills, and preferred methods of contribution, creating a comprehensive directory of expertise that the surrounding community could access through reasonable fees. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, the facility administrator, raised her hand during the question period. "How do you envision handling liability issues and quality control for the services that residents provide?" Marcus felt a surge of pride as Jake and Diego exchanged their characteristic, meaningful look before Jake responded. "We've been working with Mr. Henderson's legal team to develop a comprehensive insurance and certification program. Each service provider goes through skills verification and receives training on current safety standards. The platform includes rating systems and feedback mechanisms that help maintain quality while protecting both service providers and customers." The thoroughness of their preparation impressed Marcus as much as their presentation skills. Over the past 2 months, these boys had learned to anticipate complex business challenges and develop systematic solutions that addressed regulatory, legal, and operational concerns. Their questions during planning meetings had often identified potential problems that his experienced staff had overlooked. Maria Santos whispered to Marcus, "These boys understand customer psychology better than most marketing professionals I've worked with. They've figured out how to make people feel good about participating instead of obligated." Marcus nodded, though his attention was focused on something deeper than their business acumen. Throughout the presentation, he had watched Jake and Diego demonstrate genuine care for every individual they mentioned. Their business model wasn't just theoretically sound, it emerged from authentic relationships with people whose lives they wanted to improve. As the formal presentation concluded, residents began approaching Jake and Diego with questions about how they could participate in the platform. Marcus watched Elena Rodriguez embrace her grandsons, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words of pride and gratitude that only they could hear. The moment captured everything Marcus had learned about the difference between business success and meaningful achievement. Dr. Thompson approached Marcus with a folder containing preliminary agreements from other senior care facilities that wanted to participate in the Care Connect pilot program. We've received inquiries from 17 facilities across 3 states, she said, her voice carrying excitement that had been absent during previous budget meetings. The demand for this kind of integrated support system appears to be much larger than we initially projected. Marcus accepted the folder, though his attention remained focused on the animated conversations taking place throughout the room. Residents were describing skills they hadn't used in years. Family members were discussing contribution strategies, and facility staff were exploring how the platform could improve their residents' quality of life while strengthening their own financial sustainability. "Mr. Henderson," a voice called from across the room. Marcus turned to see Roberto Martinez approaching with Sophia beside him, both wearing expressions that combined gratitude with something deeper that he recognized as profound respect. "We wanted to thank you," Roberto said, extending his hand, in the firm grip that Marcus had learned to associate with people who understood the value of hard work. "Not just for what you've done for our family, but for what you've taught our boys about using success to lift up others." Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Jake and Diego come home every day, talking about business concepts and community responsibility. They're learning lessons about leadership and service that will guide them for the rest of their lives." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion that caught him off guard. Throughout his career, he had received numerous awards and accolades for his business achievements, but none of those recognitions had affected him as deeply as the gratitude of 2 parents who could see their children's futures expanding with possibilities they had never imagined. "Your boys have taught me just as much," Marcus replied, and meant it completely. "They reminded me that the most successful businesses are those that create value for entire communities rather than just their owners." The conversation was interrupted by Jake's excited voice calling from across the room. "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if we can help her set up a cooking class for diabetic meal planning. She was a nutritionist for 40 years, and she thinks there are lots of families who could benefit from learning how to prepare healthy meals on a budget." Marcus walked over to where Mrs. Patterson, a 78-year-old former nutritionist, was explaining her idea to a small group of residents and family members. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she described how she could teach people to create delicious, healthy meals that would help manage diabetes while reducing grocery expenses. "I've been feeling useless since I moved here," Mrs. Patterson confided to Marcus. "My mind is still sharp, and I have knowledge that could help people, but I didn't know how to offer it. These boys have given me hope that I can still make a difference." The comment resonated with Marcus more powerfully than any business success he had achieved. He realized that Jake and Diego had identified something fundamental about human nature. People needed to feel valuable and productive regardless of their age or circumstances. The platform they had designed didn't just solve financial problems, it restored dignity and purpose to lives that society had marginalized. Diego appeared at his elbow, notebook in hand, and expression serious. "Mr. Henderson, we've been thinking about something and we wanted to discuss it with you privately." Marcus followed the boys to a quieter corner of the room, curious about what new insight they had developed. Over the past 2 months, their private conversations had consistently produced the most innovative aspects of their business planning. "We've been calculating the potential impact if Care Connect expanded nationally," Jake began, consulting notes that demonstrated the mathematical skills they had been developing through their business education. "If even 10% of senior care facilities participated, we could create income opportunities for over 200,000 residents while providing affordable services to millions of families." Marcus was impressed by the scope of their vision, but he sensed that they had something more specific in mind. "What are you proposing?" Diego took a deep breath before answering. We want to establish Care Connect as a non-profit organization. Rather than a traditional business, we think the social impact would be greater if the platform focused on community benefit rather than profit maximization. The suggestion surprised Marcus, though he realized it shouldn't have. Throughout their collaboration, Jake and Diego had consistently prioritized community welfare over personal gain, approaching every business decision through the lens of how it would affect the people they were trying to help. That's a significant decision, Marcus said carefully. Non-profit organizations face different challenges than traditional businesses. Funding, sustainability, regulatory compliance all become more complex when profit isn't the primary motivation. Jake nodded seriously. We've been researching non-profit management with Mrs. Chen from your accounting department. We understand that it would require different strategies, but we think the mission alignment would be worth the additional complexity. Marcus looked at these two 9-year-old boys who had somehow developed a more sophisticated understanding of social entrepreneurship than most business school graduates possessed. Their willingness to prioritize community impact over personal financial gain demonstrated a level of maturity that challenged his own assumptions about success and achievement. If we structure Care Connect as a non-profit, he said slowly, I would want to ensure that you both receive proper recognition for your contributions. This platform represents intellectual property that could be extremely valuable in a traditional business context. Diego shook his head firmly. Our grandmother always told us that the best investments were the ones that helped other people succeed. We don't need to own this idea. We just want to make sure it helps as many families as possible. The response reminded Marcus of why he had been drawn to these boys from their first encounter. They possessed an instinctive understanding of values that he had spent decades learning through experience, and their commitment to those values remained unshaken by exposure to wealth and business sophistication. Then let's make it happen, Marcus said, extending his hand to formalize their decision. Henderson Development Corporation will provide the initial funding and ongoing support for Care Connect as a non-profit organization, with Jake and Diego Martinez serving as founding board members and community liaisons. The boys shook his hand with the solemnity that characterized all their business agreements, though their excitement was evident in their barely suppressed grins. Marcus realized that this moment represented more than just another business venture. It marked his own transformation from someone who built wealth for its own sake into someone who used resources to create lasting positive change. As the presentation event concluded and families began making their way home, Marcus found himself standing beside Elena Rodriguez, who was watching her grandsons help residents sign up for the Care Connect pilot program. Her expression combined pride, gratitude, and something deeper that he recognized as the satisfaction that came from seeing one's values transmitted successfully to the next generation. They get their business sense from you, Marcus said, genuinely curious about the woman who had raised such remarkable young entrepreneurs. Elena smiled, her eyes never leaving Jake and Diego. I taught them that success without service is empty, and service without strategy is ineffective. They needed to learn both lessons to make a real difference in the world. Her words captured something essential about the boys' approach that Marcus had been struggling to articulate. They combined genuine compassion with analytical thinking, creating solutions that addressed both emotional and practical needs. Their success stemmed not just from their business skills, but from their ability to understand what people truly needed, rather than what they claimed to want. They've changed my understanding of what business can accomplish, Marcus admitted. I spent years building wealth, but I never considered how that wealth could be used to create opportunities for others. Elena turned to face him, her expression serious but kind. "Wealth is like water," she said. "If you try to hold it all in one place, it becomes stagnant. But if you let it flow through the community, it nourishes everything it touches." The metaphor resonated with Marcus as he reflected on the past 2 months. His investment in the Martinez family had generated returns that couldn't be measured in financial terms. The satisfaction of watching Jake and Diego develop their potential, the joy of seeing Elena receive proper medical care, the excitement of creating a business model that could transform senior care across the country. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same spot where he had first encountered Jake and Diego's lemonade stand, but the scene before him had been transformed completely. The ornate iron gates now featured a small plaque reading Henderson Community Innovation Center, and the former gatehouse had been converted into offices for Care Connect and 3 other non-profit organizations that had emerged from similar partnerships between his company and community entrepreneurs. The lemonade stand itself had become something of a legend in Riverside Heights, inspiring other children to develop their own business ventures while learning about community service and social responsibility. Marcus had established a summer entrepreneurship program that provided mentorship and seed funding for young people who demonstrated both business potential and commitment to helping others. Jake and Diego, now 10 years old and seasoned non-profit executives, split their time between expanding Care Connect to new markets and developing additional platforms that addressed other community needs. Their latest project involved connecting unemployed adults with senior citizens who needed assistance with technology, creating intergenerational partnerships that benefited both groups while building sustainable income streams. Elena Rodriguez had become one of Care Connect's most successful service providers, offering financial planning consultations that helped families navigate medical expenses and retirement planning. Her monthly earnings from the platform exceeded her previous pension, but more importantly, she had rediscovered the sense of purpose and professional identity that retirement had temporarily taken away. The Martinez family had purchased a larger house in a neighborhood with better schools, though they remained committed to the same values that had guided them through their financial crisis. Roberto had expanded his landscaping business into a full-service environmental consulting company, while Sophia had completed her nursing degree and begun working in geriatric care management. As Marcus walked through the community center that had evolved from a simple business partnership, he reflected on the unexpected directions his life had taken since 2 young boys had chosen his gate as the location for their entrepreneurial venture. Their 50-cent lemonade had generated millions of dollars in community investment, thousands of jobs for senior citizens, and a model for social entrepreneurship that was being replicated across the country. But the most valuable return on his investment couldn't be quantified in economic terms. Jake and Diego had reminded him that true success was measured not by what you accumulated, but by what you enabled others to achieve. They had shown him that the most profitable businesses were those that created value for everyone they touched, and that the most satisfying wealth was that which flowed through communities rather than pooling in individual accounts. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center grounds as Marcus prepared to leave for his next meeting. As he walked toward his car, he noticed a new addition to the landscape, a small bronze plaque mounted near the entrance that read, "Success is not just reaching the top of the mountain, but using your position to help others find their own paths upward." The inscription captured everything he had learned from 2 young entrepreneurs who had approached his gate with nothing more than determination, lemonade, and a sophisticated understanding of how relationships could transform individual challenges into community opportunities. Their legacy would extend far beyond any business they created. inspiring future generations to understand that the most powerful form of success was that which lifted others as it grew. Marcus smiled as he drove away, already looking forward to tomorrow's meeting with a group of teenagers who wanted to discuss their plan for addressing food insecurity in low-income neighborhoods. The cycle of mentorship and community investment that had begun with a simple lemonade stand continued to expand, creating ripples of positive change that would extend far beyond anything he could have achieved through traditional charitable giving. The boys had been right about one thing from the very beginning. Success was about recognizing opportunities and asking for help when you needed it. But they had taught him something even more important. The greatest opportunities came from helping others succeed, and the most valuable help was that which enabled people to help themselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them. Out!